For 6 decades, one island nation has been systematically cut off from the world's largest economy, and the consequences have reshaped an entire society. In 1962, the United States imposed a comprehensive trade embargo on Cuba. It wasn't a casual policy disagreement. The Cold War was at its peak, and the Cuban Revolution had just installed a Soviet-aligned government 90 miles off the Florida coast. Washington's response was stark. No trade, no investment, no diplomatic ties. What started as a temporary pressure tactic would become the longest-running economic blockade in modern history. The blockade's mechanics were comprehensive. American companies couldn't trade with Cuba. Foreign subsidiaries of U.S. firms faced penalties for doing business there. Even ships that visited Cuban ports were barred from American harbors. Over time, the restrictions tightened. By the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba lost its largest trading partner and faced the blockade simultaneously. The island was economically isolated in ways few nations have ever experienced. The effects were immediate and severe. Cuba's GDP contracted sharply. Food became scarce. The island, which had imported roughly 80% of its food before the embargo, couldn't feed itself. Medicines, industrial parts, and fuel grew desperately difficult to obtain. The average Cuban's caloric intake dropped. Electricity blackouts became routine. What had been a middle-income nation began looking more like one in acute crisis. Cuba adapted in ways that surprised economists. The government mandated agricultural decentralization. Urban farming became widespread. Cubans grew vegetables on rooftops and in community gardens. The nation shifted toward organic farming out of necessity, not ideology. Oil imports plummeted, so bicycles replaced cars on Havana's streets. These weren't innovations born from choice. They were survival mechanisms. Over 60 years, the blockade shaped Cuba's entire economic structure. Tourism became critical, one of the few sources of hard currency. Medical services and biotechnology emerged as export industries. The government maintained tight state control, partly because isolation made market mechanisms difficult. Brain drain accelerated as skilled workers emigrated. The blockade didn't topple the regime, but it did fundamentally constrain what Cuba's economy could become. Economists still debate the blockade's ultimate impact. Some argue it prolonged the regime's survival by creating an external enemy to blame for hardship. Others contend it inflicted genuine suffering on ordinary Cubans who had no say in political decisions. What's clear is this: 6 decades of sanctions created a nation that functions differently from its regional neighbors. Cuba's economy operates under constraints most countries don't face. The blockade remains in place today, though enforcement has loosened slightly over the decades. It represents a unique case study in how sustained economic isolation reshapes a nation, its infrastructure, its industries, its culture, and its people's daily lives. Understanding Cuba's economic history requires understanding this embargo, because for 60 years, it's been the central fact of Cuban economic life. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to explore more geoeconomic stories that explain how global power, trade, and policy reshape nations and their people. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.